Welcome back to the Signs of the Times, edition number 5. We're going to begin with a little introduction into how we understand prophecy. I want to introduce you to the biblical history of repeat and enlarge. So what this principle teaches us is that the history of the Old Testament is going to be repeated and enlarged to the Christian church, and this principle is called the principle of type and antitype. The best way to understand it is to read the core verses which introduce this principle. Moreover, brethren, Paul is talking about the history of God's people in the time of Moses, okay? So, moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all did eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. So here we are told that these things happened to the Jews as examples, or to the Israelites rather, as examples unto us. And furthermore, neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed of serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured and were destroyed of the destroyer. Now all these things happened unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, in other words, for us to pay attention to, upon whom the ends of the world are come. So notice what he says. These things that happened to God's people in the Old Testament times were examples for things that are going to happen to God's people in the New Testament times, and especially to those who are living in the last days. Okay? Now, what does this mean for us? Well, I've found this statement from a professor who has written basically what this means. The book, he means Revelation, is absolutely steeped in the memories and incidences, the thoughts and the language of the church's past. To such an extent is this the case that it may be doubted whether it contains a single figure not drawn from the Old Testament, or a single complete sentence not more or less built up of material from the same source. Nothing can convey a full and adequate impression upon the point except the careful study of the book itself in this particular aspect of its contents. Well, we are certainly not going to study the whole book of Revelation, because that would be an enormous task, especially when you understand that the way to study it is to understand the whole of the Old Testament. So we're not going to do that. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at some aspects of the book of Revelation and see how the Old Testament, especially the book of Daniel, helps us to understand. Okay? Who does the beast from the sea represent? Well, that's what we want to find out. The beast from the sea in Revelation is a composite of the beasts found in Daniel chapter 7. And this is a fulfillment of the principles of repeat and enlarge and type and antitype. Can you see how it is a composite? Let me briefly explain. You see, here you have a lion, and that's in Daniel 7. You have a lion's head. Now it has 7 heads. Here you have a leopard, and here you have a leopard's body. Here you have a bear, and here you have a bear's paws. And here you have an indescribable beast. And when you put those 3 beasts together in a composite beast, what you have is an indescribable beast. But this indescribable beast has 10 horns, and so does this one. So you see, this beast in Revelation 13, this one here, is made up of all the components of these 7 beasts here in Revelation 7, and that's a repeat and enlargement of Daniel 7. You see how the prophecies are built up? You see how they work? They start off in the Old Testament, and these elements in the Old Testament are reintroduced in the New Testament, especially in the book of Revelation. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go way back to ancient Babylon, and we're going to try and find out how the prophecies in Daniel, and in this case we're going to look at Daniel 2 and 7, help us understand the prophecies in the book of Revelation. Right, now Daniel is kind of like Prophecy 101, or it's kind of like the foundation. I'm talking about chapter 2 especially. Chapter 2 is like the foundation. Chapter 3 is like the walls of the house, and then you have windows and doors that have to go in, that's Daniel 8, and then you have a roof that has to go in, and that's Daniel 11 and 12 and 9, and then you have the complete house, and that's kind of like Revelation. So this is how prophecy is built, and it's made up of the components that we find in the Old Testament pushed into the New Testament. So what can we learn from Prophecy 101? Well, another way of describing this is that you have the primary school level of prophecy, and then you have the intermediate level, and then you have the secondary school level, and then you have the university level. It's kind of like a graduated process. And the first one is basically quite easy to understand, and that's Daniel 2. But then it gets progressively more advanced and more difficult to understand. But if you always constantly refer back to the foundation, to the way that you spelt out the first prophecies, then it's understandable in the last. It's kind of like a prophecy spell checker. Those of you who use computers know very well what a spell checker is. So this is how it works. What you spell out in chapter 2 has to agree with your spelling out of chapter 7. And I'm talking about Daniel. And when you go to Daniel 8, then what you spell out in Daniel 8 has to agree with what you've already spelled out in Daniel 7 and Daniel 2. And this is how prophecy is built up. So that when you get to the more complex prophecies, your understanding of the basic ones is going to really, really assist with the understanding. I think that's reasonably clear. Now, let's look briefly at chapter 2. Now, chapter 2 is relatively easy, so we're not going to study too much about it. I'm sure you know, we've talked a little bit about it already. The king has a dream, he doesn't understand it, so the dream is given to Daniel, and Daniel comes to the king and he says, "You dreamed of future events. He who reveals secrets was speaking to you. You are that head of gold, for the God of heaven has given you the kingdom. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours." So let's look at the succession of kingdoms as outlined in Daniel 2. It starts with Babylon being the head of gold, Persia the chest of arms of silver, and then comes Greece. Greece conquered Persia, thighs of bronze. And then comes Rome, it's the legs of iron. Rome conquered Greece, and then we have the divided Europe of feet of iron and clay. And that's pretty easy to understand, and it actually fits into history exactly that way. These empires came and went, and they were foreseen by Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. "In your dream, your majesty, you saw how a stone broke loose from a mountain without anyone touching it and struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay." Important to understand that when it's destroyed, it strikes the iron in the feet, and made of iron and clay. It's stricken on the feet, and that's because the feet represent the end of time. "You saw the statue fall down and the stone roll over the iron, bronze, silver, and gold, turning them into dust. Now, what is interesting about that is apparently there is some elements of bronze, silver and gold still around. Interesting thought. We'll talk about that later. God is telling you ahead of time what will happen in the future. This is the dream and the interpretation that you asked for. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to another people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. And that rock was Christ. The rock is Jesus and his second coming. And whosoever shall fall on this rock, on the stone shall be broken, Jesus said, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder. So the rock comes and hits the image in the last days, and whoever is not prepared for that, that rock will grind him to powder. The rock is Christ and his eternal kingdom. And Daniel says, and the dream is certain and the interpretation thereof sure. And so far, this prophecy in Daniel 2 has been fulfilled accurately to the letter. We are now living in the time of the feet of the iron and the clay mingled together, and soon the rock is going to strike that kingdom and destroy it. And so we want to be on the right side of history when that happens. So let's just summarize. The iron represents Rome. Rome continues to the end of time because the iron continues to the end of time. Do you see that? Rome continues in a changed form, though. It's now metamorphosed into something else. It's now mingled with clay. The altered Roman power continues to the end of time. So that's some of the vital things that we need to understand from a study of Daniel 2. So to discover what this metamorphosed Roman power is, we have to discover what the clay is. What do you think the clay is? We know that the iron is Rome, but now it's mingled with clay. So what does the Bible tell us clay represents? O Lord, thou art our Father, we are the clay, and thou art potter, and we are the work of thy hands. So God's people are the clay. And here's another one. Behold, as the clay is in the potter's hand, so are ye in my hand. O house of Israel, God's people are the clay. So here we have an interesting combination. Rome, which equals the state, God's people, which equals the church, because that's what they are. They're God's people, they're his church. And what we have here is a union of church and state. So this combination of powers, the iron and the clay, represents the power of church and state, and that is the kingdom that reigns from the time of Rome to the end of time. That's what the prophecy is telling us. It's pretty clear. There's nothing much to be confused about here. It's easy to understand. It's an easy prophecy. The scripture points out all the indications, and here we are left with this kingdom of church and state, iron and clay. This is what we are living under today. This is what reigns until the end of time. This is what the stone is going to strike, and God's kingdom is going to come. Now, the other point that we should make about this prophecy is that it's pointing out that all these kingdoms rise and fall, rise and fall, rise and fall, and finally comes a final kingdom, the kingdom of the stone representing Christ, and it will last forever. It will not be destroyed. And that is the point of Daniel 2. Earthly kingdoms come and go until Christ's kingdom comes in the end of time, and that is going to last forever. Which kingdom do you want to belong to? That is the question that we all must decide. Remember, if you do not make a decision, then the default setting will make a decision for you. You will automatically be placed in Satan's kingdom. So, let's go to Bible Prophecy 201 now. And this introduces the 4 beasts that come out of the sea. It was during the first year of Nebuchadnezzar's grandson Belshazzar that God gave me visions and dreams. He asked me to write them down. This is what I saw. The first vision came while I was lying in my bed. I saw an ocean being whipped up by mighty winds coming from all directions. The first animal looked like a lion, but it had huge wings like an eagle. As I looked, I saw its wings torn off, and it was made to stand up like a man. A human heart was given to it, so it stopped acting like a lion. Then it disappeared. The second animal that came up out of the waves looked like a bear. As it stood, it raised up one side more than the other. I noticed that it had 3 ribs in its mouth, and some would go ahead and devour as much as it wanted. Then it disappeared. Next, the third animal came up out of the fury of the waves, which looked like a leopard, but it had 4 heads. It also had 4 huge wings, like those of a large bird. It was very strong, and nothing could stand in its way. As it raced across the earth, then it too disappeared. As I looked, I saw the 4th animal come out of the waves. It was a huge animal and looked like nothing I had ever seen before. It was monstrous, powerful, and extremely frightening to look at. It had huge iron teeth and chewed up everything it killed. And what was left, it trampled down with its huge feet. It had 10 horns coming out of the top of its head. As I looked at its horns, I saw a little horn pushing its way up in the middle of the other horns. It pushed 3 of the other horns out of the way, roots and all, and took their place. As I looked more closely, I noticed that this little horn had human eyes, but a mouth full of pride and arrogance. I was really bothered by the vision and became depressed because I couldn't make sense out of what I saw. While still in vision, I asked the angel to tell me what all this meant. And we want to know too. He said to me, "The 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon earth." Now, from this, we can actually deduce that a beast and a kingdom are the same. Do you see that? He says the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom. So a beast is a kingdom or a political power. We can understand that from what the angel has said here. Which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings which shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume it and destroy it unto the end. You see, this kingdom comes to an end too. This kingdom is not going to last. This kingdom, which is a very nasty piece of work, is going to be destroyed too. So we need to understand that we don't want to belong to this kingdom either. All right? So, Daniel 7 is a repeat and enlargement of Daniel 2. The lion is Babylon, and it corresponds to the head of gold. Persia is the bear, and it corresponds to the chest with the 2 arms. By the way, Persia is made up of, originally it was called Medo-Persia, and that's why the figure has 2 arms, because it was 2 empires joined together. Greece is the leopard, and it's got 4 wings, and it raced across the earth, and this is indicative of speed, and that's exactly how Alexander conquered the world. Alexander the Great he became, because he conquered the world before he was 30 years old. And he did it by speed. He was well known for outmaneuvering his enemies. His forces were generally smaller than what he was arrayed against, but he managed to conquer the world because he was very fast at moving his armies around. And that's what the leopard represents. And it's the bronze on the figure. And then we have Rome, and that's a massive, ugly, indescribable, evil beast, and that's exactly what Rome was like. Rome was notorious for what they called the Pax Roma, and the Pax Roma was the peace of Rome. And how that worked was, to have the peace of Rome, what they did was they eliminated all opposition. In other words, they killed everybody, and then you had peace, you see. That's the Pax of Rome. And Rome was very efficient and very good at this particular piece, this work. And so that's the peace of Rome, and that's why this beast is an indescribable, evil, ugly, and terrible beast. So, and then we have the last one, which is the divided nations of Europe, and that is the iron and clay, and this is where church and state reign supreme. So that's what the image is telling us, and just to review, here you have the head and the lion, the chest and the bear, Greece and the leopard, Rome and the terrible beast, and then you have the 10 kingdoms, and they last from 476 AD, which is generally considered the last year of the Roman Empire, and that carries on till the second coming. So it's going to be fascinating to find out how this feat of iron and clay lasts so long. Now, just to show you how repeat and enlarge works again, here we have the image and the beasts lined up together. Now, when we come to Daniel 8, Babylon drops out. Babylon is not included in the prophecies of Daniel 8. And the reason for that is because as we progress further into the future, the past begins to drop off, if you can make sense of that. So Babylon is not included in Daniel 8, but Medo-Persia is. It's the ram with 2 horns. Greece is included. It's now becomes the goat with the big horn on the front. That represents Alexander the Great. And then you have the little horn representing Rome. And then when we come to Daniel 11, Persia drops out. And we now are dealing with Greece. We're dealing with Greece and we're dealing with Rome. So you see, the further we progress into into the future, the history begins to drop off the other end. All right? So let's now look at Revelation. So here you have the 7 beasts in Daniel 7. Daniel 8 drops out in 11, and then you have Medo-Persia represented by the ram, then you have Greece, and then you have the little horn representing Rome. And then we come to Daniel 11, and Persia drops out, and then we have Greece and Rome included. And then we come to Revelation, Greece drops out, and all we have in Revelation is Rome, represented by this beast. Do you see how that works? We progress into the future, and Revelation only deals with Rome. Revelation only concerns itself with Rome, and that is because Revelation is about the end of time, and only Rome continues to the end of time. Does that make sense? It continues in a metamorphosed form, but it is still Rome. So what we need to look at now before we go into the book of Revelation is, who is the little horn? That is the question we need to deal with, and we're going to deal with that next time in our next presentation. So please come back for that, and we will see you then. In the meantime, I would still want to remind you that God is in control, and we're going to read, and we know that all things work together for good for them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. So if you are called according to God's purpose, all things will work out for good for you. Now, sometimes we may misunderstand what God does and we may question what God does, but the promise is that He's working things out for our own personal good. And sometimes that is difficult to understand, but we have to trust God. We have to have faith in Him, because it says without faith we cannot please Him. So things will happen. The signs of the times may look grim, but just remember, if you're on God's side, God is on your side.